I'll be brief. Our next presenters are from Resources in Bellingham, a great place to find all kinds of great stuff and do a lot of environmental programs. And they are part of the campaign Power Past Coal. You probably are familiar with the problem that is looming large of massive coal shipments to ports to be loaded onto ships for Asia, especially China, and that'll be right through southern killer whale orca habitat. So with that, Matt and Lindsay, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. I'm Matt Krogh. I'm the North Sound Baykeeper at Resources for Sustainable Communities. My colleague Lindsay Taylor. And you know, I was telling her this morning that I was actually kind of unhappy to be coming here to talk to all of you because there's so many wonderful things about whales. I know we all celebrate whales, and here we are here to give you yet another reason to worry about the whales. Thank you. So, I also want to talk just a little bit about the unexpected nature of getting into the business of trying to fight a coal terminal. We're water keepers, and our job is normally to stop pollution, to encourage stewardship. It's been going on in our program for about 12 years in Whatcom County and Skagit County. And I was at our conference 2 years ago, and I was talking to a friend from Alaska, and I said, so what does your keeper organization do? You guys are doing stormwater, or you're doing toxic issues? And he said, no, actually we do coal. We do coal all the time, and you're going to do coal all the time soon. And I don't know. But about a year ago, this proposal for a coal terminal. Thank you. About a year ago, this proposal for a coal terminal was brought forward, and it turned out that the folks who had been planning to put in a pier and wharf combination at Cherry Point for about 20 years had changed their plans from a very small 8 million ton terminal to North America's largest coal terminal, 48 million tons of coal that they want to mine in the Powder River Basin and put out through Cherry Point. So in our presentation right now, I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about what this project looks like, what it really means along the rail corridor, what it means for Cherry Point, and what this vessel traffic may mean in the Salish Sea if in fact this project goes through. So this slide came actually from a Peabody Coal presentation. And when we look at who's behind this project, we do have one port developer called SSA Marine. But Peabody Coal, who owns a bunch of rights to mine in the Powder River Basin, has been seeing a declining market in the US. We've been shutting down coal-fired power plants right here in Washington. We've scheduled to shut down our last coal plant, which is a great thing. But they're looking for new markets. And what you see on this chart is their plan for a railroad that will take coal from the Powder River Basin and ship it out through Cherry Point and Whatcom County. At its base, it's going to be strip mine. This isn't underground coal mining, but it's actually strip mining. This is the Antelope Mine, which is in Gillette, Wyoming, or near Gillette, Wyoming, operated by Peabody Coal. As a water quality guy, I don't know if you guys can see it, but they've been filling in a river valley there. One of their issues is doing this kind of strip mining destroys surface aquifers. They're planning to put it on trains. We're not talking to folks who are most interested in aquatic issues. We talk a lot about the trains because these are the biggest trains on the rail. They can actually be up to 2 miles long, about 17,000 tons. And as they go through all these different crossings in different communities, we see problems where they'll actually stop medical services, they'll create backups. There's an incredible amount of diesel pollution coming out of them. And this is what they actually want to build here. This is the exact same footprint as what they want to do at Cherry Point. This is about an 80-acre pile of coal, and it's right outside of Vancouver, BC. Actually, has anybody seen this before? Yeah? Did you know what it was when you were looking?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually an impressive operation. I got to go on a tour in May. They gave us about a 3-hour tour. We're not entirely sure why they were so thorough, because they knew we were from Bellingham. They knew we had some issues with it, but they were thorough. And one of the things that you see here, and I can talk about a little bit later in the presentation, is their effort at controlling dust. And they're spraying the pile as they move the pile. And one of the things that we're most concerned about is the actual dust blowing off of the terminal into the Cherry Point Aquatic Reserve. and we'll talk about why that matters in a bit. And so this is exactly where they want to do it. Anybody been on Cherry Point? Yeah? There's actually a great shot that we were going to put up in the presentation of, as the promo shot from Krog's website of this leaping orca jumping across right by their pier. But it's currently an aquatic reserve, and from Point Whitehorn there, oops, which one do you think is the pointer? Oh, there you go. So from Point Whitehorn to here is Washington State Aquatic Reserve, the Cherry Point Aquatic Reserve. It does have 3 industrial sites in it right now, and they're planning to put sort of shoehorn this thing in right there. So even though there's a lot of industrial use, what Lindsay's going to talk to you about right now is the incredible ecological amenities that are represented here.
So this is actually where they want to build this project, right in the middle of the Cherry Point Aquatic Reserve marine ecosystem. And the unique offshore bathymetry, or seafloor landscape of this area has depths of more than 70 feet, really close to the shore, and a steep gradient along the intertidal zones that has created a really diverse habitat for fish, crab, salmon, and orca. The Cherry Point Reach has a very high density of submerged vegetation compared to the rest of Puget Sound, and has more than 40 different species of marine algae and many healthy eelgrass beds. These eelgrass beds serve as a haven for limpets, crabs, and numerous species of fish and other wildlife, providing these creatures with habitat, nursery grounds, and food. So this wide variety of both aquatic and semi-aquatic fauna includes 12 species that are listed under the Endangered Species Act, 2 of which are likely pretty popular with you all out there. And they include the killer whale, or the orca, and the humpback whale. But there's also species that you all might be a little less familiar with that is just as important to the health and vibrancy of Puget Sound. And that's these little guys, the Pacific herring. So Pacific herring are a forage fish species that are particularly dependent on eelgrass as it forms a hiding place for their eggs and young. And here at Cherry Point, we have a unique species of herring that spawn in the spring. And they're the only species of herring in Puget Sound that spawn this late in the year. So what's the big deal with these little tiny fish? Well, oops, come on down. So the herring are a major food source for salmon, seabirds, seals, and a whole bunch of other marine mammals. The Cherry Point herring make up the base of the food web here in the Salish Sea, and if this terminal is built, we can pretty much count on this critically important population of forage fish to go extinct. If we lose the herring, our endangered spring Chinook salmon and other salmon species will be losing their major food source. And if we lose the salmon, our endangered orcas will be losing their major food source. And if we lose our orcas and we lose our salmon, we're losing a big part of what makes living here in the Puget Sound so great and what makes the Pacific Northwest the Pacific Northwest. And the truth is, our orcas, salmon, and herring are not only extremely important ecologically, they're extremely important economically. Commercial and recreational fisheries for herring, salmon, crab, and shellfish are multi-million-dollar industries here in Washington State. Whale watching and the tourism generated by these charismatic megafauna bring in millions of dollars every year into Washington and our local economies. So if this is the price we would pay, what exactly would we be getting?
Is anybody here from Bellingham? How many of you have actually been receiving the flyers or the phone calls or the promotional efforts from almost everybody? Yeah. When we look at this project from the perspective of folks who actually care about the environment, or property values, or community health, or long-term economic growth, this is what we see. We see that we unquestionably outweigh the couple of hundred jobs that they're promising in terms of employment. But they've had an incredible PR push, and we've been trying to figure out why they've gotten so much traction and going forward. And frankly, there's things happening behind the scenes, and it's been going on for years right now. And it turns out there's really a lot of money. One of the things that was unexpected, I mentioned this has been going on for about 20 years, some level of proposal. A few years ago, Goldman Sachs purchased about 49% of SSA Marine, the primary developer, gave them the capital to actually go ahead and with a much larger project. And Peabody Coal, looking for new markets, there's a lot of money. And we were trying to figure out exactly how much money, and we came across a Peabody Coal slide that showed that in 2010, they had about $1 billion in profit as the world's largest private coal company. if this thing goes through, and they're able to put 50 million tons of coal through Cherry Point, they stand to profit another $1 billion every year, and not revenue but profit. So we've seen an incredible lobbying effort all in the back rooms. So the question is, what does this really mean for Salish Sea and for Puget Sound? Well, as we look at this slide, I want to point out two things. One is that we only have a couple of channels where these very, very large ships can come through. One, of course, is Strait, where we see a lot of orcas. The other is Rosario Strait. And Rosario Strait right now is seeing about 700, oh wait, better slide, there we go. Rosario Strait is seeing about 700 oil tankers a year right now. We're seeing about 100 going through Harrow. And the concern that we have is if this project actually goes in, let me go back a second. If this project actually goes in, we'll see about another 170 Cape-sized ships, the largest ships in the seas, and another 300 or so Panamax, the largest ones that can go through the Panama Canal, coming to serve Cherry Point. And it's not just this project, though, because right now there's a proposal to triple the tar sands exports coming through the Kinder Morgan pipeline. Everybody here has heard about Keystone, right? Yeah, well, Keystone may be delayed. Well, right now we actually have 100 ships going to Burrard Inlet in Vancouver to service that Kinder Morgan pipeline. And we can see that go up to maybe 300. Have any of you guys been out on the waters and seen these bulk carriers coming through? There's some coming through right now. Yeah. This is the largest size ship that serves the San Juan Islands. These are to scale. I was actually on that ship at West Shore when they took us to the tour. It's the Cape Violet. And they're really, really big. Really big.
So they're not only big, they also provide a lot of problems for the marine life in the Puget Sound and Salish Sea. And one of the impacts is the negative effect of noise pollution from these kinds of ships on marine mammals. So most of you know, because of the presentation earlier, right, that noise travels faster through water than air, and that marine life, especially marine mammals, are extremely sensitive to noise pollution. So bulk carriers, like the ones Matt just showed you, emit high intensity levels of low frequencies that can affect whales and dolphins hundreds of kilometers away. Due to the extreme reliance that these animals have on underwater sound for basic life functions, like searching for food and mates and avoiding predators, and the absence of any mechanism really to protect these critters from those kinds of impacts, underwater noise pollution disrupts marine life in a very serious way. Habitat displacement is also a concern, as increased stress levels from the noise pollution have been shown to cause whales to deviate from their normal migration paths in the presence of these low-frequency sounds emitted from carrier ships like the ones that would be coming here.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about coal dust in a minute, but one of the things that we're deeply concerned about are the impacts of actually seeing spills. We've had really a wide variety of oil spills in Puget Sound over the years, but right now when we think about the amount of vessel traffic that's actually coming through and trying to look for what aggregated risk we'll see, there are real concerns. I'm not going to try to quantify it for you right now, in part because it's been about 6 years in the making and we've been waiting for 3 years, but next month we're expecting to see a vessel traffic safety study that the Army Corps of Engineers has in hand and hopefully will release soon, that will actually allow us to understand whether or not, when we look at the Straits, this vessel traffic is at the point of the carrying capacity, if we actually could mitigate more vessels coming through, or if we really need to take a look at whether or not we should have any more deep draft vessels coming through. The other thing that's particularly of concern is a very recent study that came out last month that showed that because of how bunker fuel, which is, everybody knows bunker fuel, right? The sludge that they use for the or fuel on the largest ships, that's particularly toxic to herring and other fish eggs. It gets absorbed in through their egg sacs.
So in addition to the toxic chemicals that can be introduced to our marine environment through a wreck and a spill, the introduction of non-native invasive species will be just as harmful. The vessels that would load at the Gateway Pacific Terminal would be crossing the Pacific Ocean empty. This means that in order to make the long journey across the open ocean safely, they will fill their holds full of ballast water to increase propeller immersion and improve steering. Since these particular carriers are so large, they use a tremendous amount of ballast water, which is taken on in the coastal waters of China or India and discharged before the cargo is loaded here in Puget Sound. This ballast water discharge contains plants, animals, viruses, and other microorganisms that are foreign to our waters. Ballast water is the leading source of invasive species introduction in the United States marine waters, and these invasors pose threats to human health, ecosystem stability, commercial and recreational fishing, and tourism.
So again, this is the Cape Violet that I mentioned that we actually got to tour, and my friend Paul Anderson from the Chucknut Conservancy, who's an incredible photographer, came as well. So when we look at the impacts of this project, we see vessels coming through our waters, lots and lots of very large underpowered vessels coming through our waters. We see major impacts from trains, major impacts from the mining itself. I'm just going to talk a little bit about climate change impacts from this type of project as well. But the very local and very specific impacts are real as well. And this was not a windy day. We were up there, we got to climb up on a gantry, and frankly, this giant machinery is really cool. And if you get to go do a tour, I encourage you. But one of the things that the project proponents have been trying to sell us on is this idea that this device, this snorkel device, goes inside and prevents dust from escaping into the marine environment during loading. It's not true. This is, again, the Cape Violet. It's about 5% full at this point based on looking at the water line. The thing that they don't tell you is that they don't turn this thing off as they pull out of one hole and put it in the next. They can't because these conveyor belts with massive tons and tons and tons of coal are going all the time. It wasn't a windy day. This is supposed to be white. That is all coal dust on top of the ship. And in a windy day, we'd see it end up in the marine environment. There's going to be dissolved oxygen issues. Coal also has a bunch of heavy metals, but it's also got a lot of PAHs in it, which are particularly toxic as well to herring and rib. Anybody recognize it? Okay. So we have Point Roberts, and we have the Swassen ferry terminal here, and that is the coal terminal. When we first started worrying about this project, we started getting calls from people, and in particular, I had a call from a window washer, a professional window washer out of Ferndale, who called because he'd seen one of our articles and said, "Well, I just want you guys to know that business is booming." And booming. And I said, "Yeah, I go to Point Roberts every day now, clean windows." And it's because the coal from here actually disperses at least 5 miles down to the marina here where this guy was working. This is obviously just a circle I drew on a map. We know it goes that far. We don't know how much farther it goes. So this is Cherry Point. Again, here are the 3 industries that are here. This is the entire reserve area. I wasn't going to talk anymore about herring, but we're really into herring these days. And when they do come in, they actually gather offshore right here. It's about a mile offshore. They call it the herring holding area, which I think of like cuddling. But then they come ashore to spawn through a benthic trench that comes right up about here, and then they spread up and down the shore. This herring population was about 17,000 tons 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and is now down to 700 tons. And one of the main goals of this aquatic reserve is to actually help restore these herring populations. However, if we see this, what we're going to see is a massive amount of PAHs blanketing their spawning areas up and down the coastline. This is their major area for them. We'll also see a constant trickle of fuel spills. It happens every place.
So coal's contributions to the health problems and global climate change make it easy to see that the real impacts of burning the dirtiest, most carbon-intensive fossil fuel are not good. Being a gateway for coal export would fly in the face of our region's leadership in a clean energy economy. Shipping up to 100 million tons of coal a year to Asia through West Coast ports would spread toxic coal dust in dozens of rail communities, clog our railroads and ports, risk our health and the health of our environment, pollute our air and water, and continue to stoke the climate crisis. Global climate change, or global warming, is real. Human activities, especially those related to the use of fossil fuels, have and will continue to change the composition of the Earth's atmosphere and consequently climate conditions here in the Pacific Northwest and around the world. The impacts of these changes should not and really can no longer be ignored. Our oceans are getting more acidic, sea level is rising, storm events are becoming more frequent and more severe. The world we are living in is changing, and it's going to continue to change. But we can make decisions now that will help us ease into these transitions and make our communities more climate resilient and ready to adapt to these changes. Building a coal shipping terminal here on our coastline is not going to help. And neither is coal. Here in Washington State, we already know this. In fact, we understand that burning coal is so bad for our health and our environment that we passed a law that prohibits burning coal for electricity within our borders. So if we've moved beyond coal, why do we want to ship it over to China for them to burn?
So this is where we are in the process. It's been going on for about 20 years. The new version has been around for about a year and a half, and we expect that by the end of March, they will finally have a complete permit in place. They've already started the environmental impact assessment. And so from you, what I'm hoping that we can get is a commitment that you'll actually help with the scoping. And the scoping process, everybody here has been involved in EIS or in some fashion? No? A lot of people. Good. The scoping process is the part where at the very beginning of the environmental impact assessment, the public has the right to tell them what they should be looking at. And so there's going to be a very formal period of time. It's about 60 days. That will take comments during that 60 days, probably starting at the end of May. And whether or not you write letters or emails or whatever else, it's an opportunity to actually let those agencies know, which in this case are the Army Corps of Engineers, Whatcom County, and the Department of Ecology, what they have to look at when they're considering whether or not this terminal can go forward. It's up to us, really, to make sure that this assessment shows that impacts on whales are important, that impacts on water quality are important, that even climate change, we're going to fight to try to get them to look at climate change. We don't know if it'll work, but if enough people ask them, they might. And then finally, I just wanted to point out Power Past Coal itself. It's a campaign and it's a coalition. Lindsay and I are both employed by Resources in the Baykeeper program, but we also have Sierra Club, the Washington Environmental Council, a group called Climate Solutions, the Columbia Riverkeeper, Earth Justice, all formed this Power Past Coal coalition. So if you're a member of any of those groups, you're in it too. And then if you go to the Power Past Coal website, we have sign-ons there for organizations. We have about 80 other organizations who are also joining in to try to stop this ridiculously bad idea. So that's it, and we would love to take questions. How much time do we have for questions? 10 minutes?
We have about 15 minutes.
10 minutes? Sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious who's in charge of the ultimate decision. Is it a federal thing, or is it a state thing, or is it county?
That's a great question. There are multiple decision points along the way. Two of the primary ones are Whatcom County has local land use permits. One is the shoreline permit, one is a major development permit. And those permits will be voted on after the environmental impact assessment is done. It'll be voted on by the county council. So that's one major point. The second is the Department of Natural Resources, of course, owns and operates the Cherry Point Aquatic Reserve on all our behalf, but they have the option to not give them a lease to use our aquatic lands there for the pier and for the wharf. So those two decisions are really the critical ones. There's also the tribes have the ability to ask the Army Corps to not permit it, so that's where the federal aspect comes in. And there's a host of other smaller permits, but if these major things are approved, the other ones will be. So, yeah.
In the event that it does get turned down and they don't get permitted, what's their plan B? Where would they put it?
So right now, every port on the West Coast has been approached by coal companies. We've been filing public document requests up and down the coast to try to find out where they're looking, and we can't find a place they're not looking to export coal. One of the things that we didn't really talk about, though, is why Cherry Point is so attractive. And Cherry Point in particular has this very steep gradient that it's not only good for the ecological qualities that Lindsay was talking about, but it's amazing if you want to bring in a huge deep draft vessel and not try to get a dredging permit. So without dredging, they could get these ships within about 1,000 yards of shore. Yesterday or 2 days ago, the local county commissioners in St. Helens just issued permits for a coal terminal there. There's a bunch more permits to to go through in this process at the federal and state level, but there's constant pressure at every one of these ports.
That's St. Helens, Oregon.
St. Helens, Oregon. Yeah.
I saw what you described as a snorkel as far as the loading process, and it looked like they had some efforts to control dust. We live in Anacortes, and in Guima's Channel, Port of Anacortes loads coke from Pier 2, and they use it, which is a byproduct of the refineries looking where coke is, where they'll take it in the trucks and they'll unload it from the bottom of the trucks onto a conveyor belt through a snorkel and onto the ships. And I think the efforts have certainly been made to control that dust. We go by it every single day, and there's a lot of dust going into the water. I don't know if you were aware of that or what you knew about cokes. I'm pretty sure it's not good. So.
Yeah, actually, we're starting to look much more closely at coke, in part because as we've been finding coal on the rail lines, we're also finding coke. And there's actually a lot of it, because so much of that coke comes up to Talco out here at Cherry Point. We know that, I've actually had a tour of Talco as well and asked them what was in the coke, because it's all entirely consumed in their refinery process for the aluminum. And they said, well, it's 97% coke. What's the other 3%? But it's all going up in their air emissions. And so we're right now starting to take a closer look. I'm surprised about the dust, though, because it's so much less friable than a powder-for-basin coal.
Bring your camera. I mean, not that I, want
to
make an issue there, but it's been fairly disturbing, actually. It looks like,
that's good to know. We'll come take a look. Yeah, in the back.
Has there been any real success stories with communities successfully repelling these large corporations that have all this money? Is there anything that gives you hope or inspired you that other communities have succeeded?
Well, we actually have a history of keeping bad projects out of Whatcom and Skagit County. Right now, we had a nuclear plant proposal that was going to draw water from the Skagit River, which is not there. We had a power plant that was proposed for Sumacs. That, of course, we would see a whole lot of air emission issues in the Fraser River Valley there. So we have a history of it here now. There are a bunch of different places where we can win. But one of the things that's most important, at least to me, is that it's going to actually take a whole lot of people and a whole lot of political pressure. And one of the reasons why I know that is we've been talking to Commissioner Goldmark, who seems to want to not approve the terminal, but keeps asking for more letters and more calls of what people actually think about it. And what we tell these folks, whether it's during the CEPA process or during the political process, matters.
Do you have some politicians on your side in terms of our senators, our representatives? What is their interest in this?
So, at the state level, we have a lot of senators and representatives who are concerned about this. At the federal level, unfortunately, there's a real push for exports of any sort. Even if it's exports of coal that's going to power economic competitors, it's an export. So we've had Rick Larson actively support this project. Our federal senators have not made any particular statements yet.
Mine is the same question.
Same question. Yeah.
Just my suggest that take a look at Vashon Island's recent success in the last year with the gravel pit mining operation and field grass beds, very similar scenarios. And we're still celebrating the fact that it's not happening in Maury Island.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, Commissioner Goldmark likes to talk a lot about Maury Island and what happened there, and we're hoping that that's a signal that he'd be willing to take the same sort of action at Cherry Point. So, yeah.
This is a comment rather than a question. The organization that was most responsible for the detouring of the Keystone XL project it's called 350.org, and Bill McKibben is the head of that. And yesterday, for the first time, I got one of their standard emails, which was to send a letter to Commissioner Goldmark about this plant. So maybe the answer is not just the local efforts, but the fact that there are very large, effective national organizations that now have the tools and the media and the connection to get a national awareness.
I think the national awareness is critical, and Bill McKibben did come out to Bellingham in May to speak about the coal terminal. That particular email was also signed by one of the folks from Climate Solutions, who are actually our organizing body of Power Pass Coal. So yeah, there's going to be increasing national attention. One of the things that happened, Sightline recently published an article that was comparing the potential climate impacts of Keystone to these two major proposals for coal export from Washington, and we're about 20% more in terms of potential climate impact than Keystone. So one of the other things too I just want to throw out there, one of the problems with the Keystone success is that there's going to be increasing pressure to get tar sands oil out through other channels. And right now there is a pipeline that's going through the Briard Inlet. That's the one I was talking about that might triple. There's also the Enbridge pipeline proposal. But we're deeply concerned about seeing a vast increase of all sorts of carbon fuels going through our waters. We have time for a couple more? Yeah. Yeah.
In your opening map, I think you showed the path of the coal going along the Columbia River. And having driven that as many times as I have, and seeing the long trains that carry it, do you have any idea how much just from coming off of those trains is polluting the Columbia?
It's really hard to understand and estimate when and where it's coming off. We have, you know, the coal company folks say it all comes off in the first 100 or 200 miles, and a lot does because it fouls the ballast and they have derailments in those first couple 100 miles. But we have video of one of the trains going down to Columbia with a plume of coal that's coming off it. We have other videos with nothing coming off. And so, you know, the climatic conditions of that day, we know they lose several percent. Up to 3% of the load during transit. How much is going to be in the Columbia? I don't know. We can, my friend Brett Vandenheuvel is the Columbia River keeper down there, and he's keeping track, but quantifying it's really, really hard.
Yeah.
Yes? Yeah?
How many current county commissioners are there in Whatcom County, and how do they stand on this issue? And if some of them are in favor of it, can you vote them out this year?
I work for a 501c3. We don't do politicking, but I think that's a wonderful idea. So our next election is 2013 for the county council. There's 7 county council members. The one who, against the rules, was taking around a petition in support of this just got voted out. So that was good. But at this point, there's a real problem with trying to get them to say anything because they've been informed by their legal counsel that they're not allowed to talk about it or talk to people about it necessarily, because at the time these permits come before them, they sit in what's called a quasi-judicial function and they vote on it. So they're supposed to maintain some appearance of neutrality. I don't know how they do that for the next 3 years or 4 years until they vote on this. I think it's not possible, but they're supposed to. Yeah?
Do you have any data on the rail line going along the water from like Everett? There's always a slide there. And do these excessive trains, a mile and a half trains, 18 of them a day, are they going to cause more slides?
So there's research, ongoing research. The data indicates exactly what you're saying, that there is a problem. Right now, for the last 5 years, there's been an increasing number of coal trains coming through, going to West Shore Terminal in Vancouver, and they're the biggest, heaviest trains out there, and we're seeing an increase in really kind of small landslides all along the Chuckanuts and all along that route. So yeah, I mean, we're looking into it. There's other folks looking into it too, and it will be a problem if we get a lot of trains coming through. Yes, sir.
Why don't they just dump the coal at the Longview Millennium Project rather than haul it all the way up to Cherry Point?
So when I said there are coal companies approaching every port on the West Coast,
right.
There's actually a bunch of coal companies, and there are a bunch of different operations. So the folks with SSA Marine and Peabody have a vested interest, of course, in making money. The folks down in Millennium, it's a different organization. It's Amber Energy out of Australia and Arch Coal out of St. Louis. So they're essentially competing proposals, and every one of them, though, is betting on this idea that there should be an ongoing, nearly infinite growth in demand from China.
So that could both be there.
They could both be wrong too, and that's actually one of the other concerns. In Bellingham, we've seen, you know, a history of essentially an industry shutting down and leaving a toxic legacy. We see that for coal terminals too. There's one down in LA that operated from about '97 to 2003, I think. Shut down, and actually there's still litigation trying to get them to clean it up. And it's, you know, there are a lot of concerns about this project. Not projecting too far ahead, but if it were to be built and go under, I don't want to have to clean it up then either. So, yeah.
But on the first, are the international tankers that come in and out, are they also required to do ballast change like coastal tankers are?
So the problem is that there is a rule that all these tankers or freighters coming in are supposed to exchange ballast out of the international boundary. Two things that are the problem with that is, one, there's no enforcement. Actually, there's a spot check by the Fish and Wildlife. I just found out they do once in a while. But secondly, they get a pass if it's bad weather, and it looks like they'll be thrown into the boat. So what Lindsay was talking about with the ballast water, freighters come in more or less full. They've got stuff on there, and they leave more or less full. The Cape-sized vessels in particular can have up to 17 million gallons of ballast water that they need to exchange. It's a massive amount. So.
And the second question, you mentioned that the tribes have the ability to also request permits are granted. Do you have tribes in the North Sound that are working with you on that, who might be willing to take that stance?
So that's actually a really tricky question. In part, the Lummi Nation is really the lead on this because they're immediately adjacent to the Cherry Point Aquatic Reserve, and their ancestral homeland is there. But they have been in confidential discussions with the coal companies for a couple of years. That they're actually not allowed to talk to us right now, the folks within their structure. Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't it true that this is a very critical herring run because it's one of the earliest ones along the whole coastline? And
so
very important for migratory seabirds especially?
That's true, yeah. But they're actually spring spawning. Most of the Pacific herrings spawn in the winter. But this actually used to be almost half of all the herring in Puget Sound when they were at their peak run, the 17,000 tons of spawning biomass. So yeah, there's the spring chinook time their migration to the Cherry Point herring. The surf scoters time their migration. It's a critical spot. Yeah. Yeah.
How much do you charge for the program?
Nothing. If you've got a good audience, we'll come. Yeah.
What's the advantage for the Lummies to approve it? So how can we find Warren Buffett who owns BN?
So how can we what?
Warren Buffett. I mean, he owns Burlington North.
So I think there are a lot of tactics that we will be taking in the future as we go forward, and if this project continues to seem to have steam, and one of them will be to publicly reach out to Warren, my friend. Any other questions?
So it's an aquatic preserve. It's not that far offshore. How come the ESA isn't having more of an impact on this? Or, I mean,
that's an excellent question.
Yeah. Okay, good. And there is no answer. I've heard this before. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we did about 6 years ago, along with Fred Feldman and some other folks, was file a petition to get the Cherry Point herring listed as an endangered species. All the other ones are migratory; they don't reside there. The Cherry Point species, for a place-specific species, the Cherry Point herring, if they were approved, I think they would actually have a real impact under the ESA, but the others, they appear to be ignoring.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, how about the whales? They're endangered. Does that play into it at all?
We hope it will, but so far, in terms of the operations of the industries that are there, in terms of the operation of the aquatic reserve, not yet. Yes, sir.
On the other side of the issue is our culture and our thirst for fossil fuels that's driving all of this, and how many people drove to get here today?
No, I think that's a really important point, and as far as we go as a society, I think it's going to be on us to reduce our use. The thing I want to say about driving, though, and this is another thing I got from Sightline and from their research, which is a great institution, was 50 million tons of coal. In terms of its carbon imprint or carbon impact, it's the same as if all of Northern California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana stopped driving for a year. So I think your point's a good one in the aggregate, but when we talk about a single thing that's going to have a massive impact, 50 million tons of coal will have a really big impact. Anybody else? Yeah.
What's the number one thing we can all do right now to, I mean, what steps should we be taking right now?
Well, there are some petitions that are being circulated, and I know that not everybody believes in the efficacy of petitions, but in this particular case, we'll be delivering them in person to Goldmark in a couple weeks. Can't remember the exact date. But realistically, writing to Goldmark, signing the petition, and participating in scoping. And right now, this participation in scoping is going to be critical to make sure that all the potential impacts are outlined, in particular economic impacts. When they advertised for a group to actually run the SEPA process, they didn't actually put in economic or health impacts as criteria for what they needed to be able to do. And that's a problem. So we will be actively pushing them to look at all those issues, but it's really going to be people here, or like you, writing in and demanding that the real impacts of the project be taken into account that can change its course. Yeah?
What is Goldmark's address and his first name?
Peter. So in the back of the room we have flyers from the Power Pass Coal, and on the back of the flyer, it is still there, right? Yes, we have his address, his first name, and how to reach him. And also the Power Pass Coal website has front and center several different actions that you can take. One of them is this. We'll give you all the information you need for Goldmark. Yeah.
In addition to the 200 jobs, what other source of revenue will the state or the county get through this business being up in county?
So we are waiting for yet another study that we have in a couple of weeks that looks at the net economic impacts only in Bellingham. But when you say revenue, there's actually a net cost to all of this because every one of these places where the rail comes through that needs safety improvements, because there's a vast increase in traffic, train traffic, we pay for 90% of it. The taxpayers pay for 90% of those improvements. The rail is not allowed to pay more than 10%. So when you look at a $50 million intersection here, $50 million intersection there, and you add up the dozens and dozens and dozens along the rail line, you contrast that with, they project about $10 million in tax revenues each year in Whatcom County, some of which goes to the state general fund, some comes to Ferndale, some comes to Whatcom County. We see a massive public investment in infrastructure. Yeah?
You know, one thing that we haven't addressed is that all this coal is supporting a communist regime.
Yeah, and you know, one of the guys that we speak with, Dr. Frank James, we have a coalition of doctors in Whatcom County who call themselves the Whatcom Docs, doctors opposing coal shipments. 190 of them signed on, which is unprecedented to have that many doctors agree on anything. But Dr. James is actually married to a Chinese national, and he goes back every month to visit family. And his stories of what the people are suffering through in terms of air pollution in particular, but also water issues from coal, are stunning. And they don't have a choice. Here at least, we get to participate in a process, whether it's a long, drawn-out SEPA process in our democracy, but they don't have a choice.
This is just a statement, but it's been my experience over the last year or so when I've made phone calls or written to, let's say, our state senators or senators in Washington, D.C. They're not environmentally friendly. At least that's what I'm getting back. And it's disappointing and a little bit weird to me. I get letters from Patty Murray, and she doesn't support. She wants the jobs. I mean, that's what everybody says. All of the people that don't like the fact that I don't support these things are upset because I'm against them. And they say, well, we need the jobs. We need the jobs. Well, they don't realize, like what you're saying, it's 200 jobs. Look at the damage.
Over the next couple of months, we have a couple of different research projects that were farmed out to consultants to look at economic impacts and net job impacts, and we'll be working really hard to clarify that. Yeah. One more?
Is the comment period for the EIS, is that happening right now, or is that coming up?
No. So if you all either grab a flyer or go to our websites or sign up for the petition, we'll let you know. But they can't start it until we actually have a complete permit in hand, which they've been delaying for 9 months now. But we expect the comment period for scoping to start at the end of May. But it's a very formal thing. They're not going to take any comments that you give now, or letters that you give now, won't be included as part of the scoping process. It has to be during that time frame. Yeah?
I'm wondering if there's any data about the air pollution implications of coal burn in China versus like other places in the world, just because of the way in which they're kind of our neighbor to the east in terms of pollutant sources. So are they, would coal burn there have a bigger impact on us than coal burn in other places? You'd expect there is just because of prevailing westerlies, but I don't just wonder if there's any data on that kind of question.
So there is data, and there's an estimate by the USGS that about 30% of new mercury coming into Lake Whatcom in particular, they were looking at in Whatcom County, comes from Chinese sources. How that actually works in the global mercury pool, when you get mercury moving around in the atmosphere and how many times it circles the Earth before it drops, where it comes from, I don't know. But that is the estimate we got. Last one, yeah.
To bring it back to the orcas a little bit, I don't know how important this herring prime area is in the life cycle of the orcas. And if it is or reduces their population, that has an impact on the tourism. You can say that's jobs, dollars to go to your congressmen, senators with. But have you studied to compare those things?
Yeah. I mean, we have any number of different studies that are either in the works or completed right now. But yeah, as Lindsay pointed out, the herring are the primary prey of the Chinook, which are 70 or 80% of orca diets. Anyone?
80.
80, thank you. So in terms of counting the jobs, right now our economic studies are focused on Bellingham for a number of reasons. But as we get more economic studies going, looking at exactly that is going to be critical. Okay. All right.
That just jogged my memory. The Department of Ecology has a website of what they call vetted statements that they kind of prove, that are accurate statements. And one of those statements that I think would be very interesting to senators and congresspeople is that it is estimated that our tourism industry in Washington State is valued at $9.5 billion per year. And I think that's a big number that they would take a look at, and a lot of it is because of our unique ecosystem.
And our reputation for that as well. And even if there aren't immediate, obvious direct impacts from something like this, the reputation impacts, whether it's for agriculture along the way or for the unique aquatic ecosystems, it's a real concern. So thank you all very much.